Let me follow up on that. You know, the abortion bills, they're all in their separate bills that are now comprising the omnibus bill, didn't really make much progress during the regular session. And I kind of want to ask why you thought, given the fervor we are seeing now, why do you think those bills didn't really go anywhere during the regular session?
Well, because they couldn't, with the 2/3 block in the Senate, and honestly, because there are Republican members who didn't want to see them go anywhere either. I know that tomorrow on the Senate floor, there are Republican members who are going to take yes votes to pass this legislation, and they would have preferred never to have been put in that situation. I wish that more would do, as we've seen Representative Sarah Davis do, and just stand for what they believe in and what they know is right. But you know, we all have to live with the decisions that we make, and certainly as elected officials with the votes that we cast. And for each of us, we'll own the consequence of that.
Do you think, I kind of want to ask another kind of political question, which is that in the last few months, especially in the special session, we've heard a lot of conversations about family planning and women's health together with abortion, kind of under the rubrics of the umbrella of women's health. And that's kind of a similar conversation to what was going on in 2011, but it was used in another way in that we saw Republicans kind of conflating family planning and abortion and using that as their justification for family planning cuts. So I'm curious if you think that it's important or advantageous to talk about the universe of women's health because these issues are related and it's affecting people on the ground in certain ways, or is it risky to have that conversation because it could be used in the way that we saw in 2011? Is it better to kind of talk about family planning services on one end and then have a separate conversation about abortion and the abortion debate separately? And I'm curious if you have thoughts about that.
I think you can't talk about them separately.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe the orange shirts that are here in the Capitol right now and the people who are wearing blue shirts in the Capitol right now all agree on a mutual goal. And the mutual goal is to decrease abortion. No one is pro-abortion. I think that the approach that's being taken through this bill is completely wrong-headed, because changing the legal framework of abortion, changing the access landscape to abortion is not going to decrease the demand for it. And that's been proven out statistically by comparison of countries that criminalize abortion and countries that allow abortion. It doesn't change demand at all. The only thing that really gets to the root of decreasing that demand is to decrease unplanned pregnancy. And the only way to do that is to empower women to be able to achieve that. Women really want to be responsible, and I think that it is very disrespectful to assume that women empowered with the ability to prevent unplanned pregnancies won't choose that. And again, we're seeing that that's played out because of that Medicaid birth rate rising as a consequence of cutting that off. And then the other part of that, of course, is getting back to a place where we once were a long time ago with age-appropriate, scientifically based sex education courses. And the idea that somehow if we talk to young people about sex and the consequences of unprotected sex will create a demand for it is really absurd, and unfortunately is contributing to the high rate of teen pregnancy that we see in Texas today.
Do you sense any shift in tone, especially among Republican colleagues and their approach to family planning and funding family planning and getting back to what you were talking about with preventing unplanned pregnancies as a way to address, reducing the number of abortions. I mean, that was something that I feel like got a little lost in 2011, and I'm curious if you've seen a shift or sensed a shift among Republican colleagues on that issue.
I've definitely sensed a shift in terms of the way they're talking about it. I think they understand there's some pretty valid criticism being wielded with regard to what the consequences of this bill will be. And they'd like to talk the talk of, yes, let's do everything we can. In the interim, let's work really hard on that. And that's great, and I hope that it's sincere. But it won't happen if we continue to say that Planned Parenthood can't be a provider of those family planning services. And it won't happen if we can't help build the infrastructure that was lost as a result of those cuts.
Is there a part of the bill that you think is most damaging, most impactful, and is, and I don't want to ask you a legal question, but you have legal training. Is there a part of the bill that you think is most legally susceptible in terms of arguing against that in court?
Well, this is a constitutional liberty, and states cannot infringe upon that in a way that creates an undue burden. While states can have an interest in, of course, health and safety standards, they can't create undue burdens for people to be able to exercise their constitutional rights. I think probably most problematic for the proponents of this bill is the ambulatory surgical center standard. When that standard was put in place for post-16-week gestational periods, it took about 2.5 years before ambulatory surgical centers were on the ground and able to do that work. And that was just to put 5 of them on the ground. We're talking about the possibility of 30+ clinics closing around the state. And even in the best case scenario, if all the funding in the world could be found, which it won't be, and if they could replenish or rebuild, we know that it's at least 2.5 years, just like it was the first time this requirement was put in place. And in the meantime, I don't even want to think about that in the meantime.